Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Install, Configure, and Manage the Mailbox Role. This is a primary section for the 70-341 exam for Exchange 2013 Core. The subtopic we're discussing is Plan the Mailbox Role. Under the subject Plan the Mailbox Role, this objective may include, but is not limited to, plan for database size and storage performance requirements, plan for virtualization requirements and scenarios, plan mailbox role capacity and placement, design public folder placement strategy, and validate storage by running JetStress. Okay, so let's get started. The company we're looking into here is called Globocom. They're a large provider of global broadband. Now the problem they're having is that they're moving from a legacy version of Exchange to Exchange 2013, and they want to be sure they're planning properly for the mailbox role. Our goal is going to be to explain key aspects of the mailbox role, including virtualization and public folder deployment, and what tools are available to assist in proper planning. Okay, so let's get started. The mailbox server handles so much more under this new two-server role architecture than it did before. In addition to hosting mailbox databases and public folder mailboxes and folders, it also handles the following. It handles transport services. In fact, 2 of the 3 transport services are on the mailbox server role. The front-end transport service is on the client access server. On the mailbox server itself, we have the transport service, also known as the hub transport service, and we also have the mailbox transport service. The mailbox server role also handles unified messaging services and high availability services. So it has quite a bit on its plate, and knowing that should help us because when we are looking at giving hardware to the mailbox server role, whether it's physical hardware or virtualized hardware, we need to make sure we provide enough power. We need to make sure that performance doesn't suffer because we fail to provide the adequate hardware needs of the mailbox server role. Now, most likely you're already familiar with the various database files that are utilized within Exchange. If you aren't, I recommend that you take some time and go back and watch the Exchange 2013 administration course. That course is more of an introductory and administrative course for Exchange 2013. So with mailbox database files, we're familiar with the fact that there's a mailbox database file with an EDB extension. That file for that database just continues to grow and grow and grow, and so we need to be careful about that because the larger that file, the more difficult it is to restore it. So past a certain point, you would want to utilize multiple databases, break your mailboxes out between these multiple databases so that you can easily restore in the event of some form of disaster. Now, the file, this EDB file, it is accessed by the Extensible Storage Engine, or ESE. And each database has its own set of transaction logs. So that's the next database file type. The transaction logs.log are essential because what happens is when mail comes in and goes through the transport service or through the mailbox transport service to the database, what happens is simultaneously mail is written to the transaction logs and to the memory cache for the server. And then once the database becomes free, that information is written to the database. Now, these transaction logs are 1 megabyte in size. In addition, there's a checkpoint file. This checkpoint file is useful for determining what logs have been written to the database. So in the event of a failure, or if the system crashes, the database file is able to check with the checkpoint file and see what data it received and what data can be obtained from the transaction logs to catch it up to speed. And that's why, to avoid problems, it's good to separate that mailbox database file and the transaction logs. The next file is the temporary files, temp.edb. And so this contains temporary information that's deleted when all the stores are dismounted or when the Exchange Information Store service is stopped. Then we have the reserve log files with a JRS extension. These files are actually used to reserve space for additional log files that might come in. So the Exchange server will only use these files in an emergency should the disk become full and it's not able to write additional transactions to the disk. And these log files are also 1 megabyte in size. I know you've seen this before, but let's just jump over to our Mailbox server and take a look at these files in action. Alright, so here we are on our Exchange 2013 Mailbox server. Let's take a look at our transaction logs and database. We're going to go into the Mailbox folder. Here's the Mailbox database. And then you can see the log files as they build up. So we scroll down, we see the 10 JRS logs that are held there, the reserved log files. Here's the checkpoint file. Here's the E00. This is the existing log that is being written to at the moment. So as logs are written to, they get saved over with the longer name. You can see the temp file as well. And down here at the bottom, here we see the temp EDB. That's the temporary file for the database, and then we have the database itself. So for the most part, as an Exchange administrator, we don't typically come in and look at these files often. We know that they exist, and it's essential that we know that because it actually affects the way we deploy Exchange. We want to make sure that our log files and our database are actually separated and in two separate locations as far as disks or volumes. When we think about backing up Exchange, we need to make sure that we have an Exchange-aware backup solution so that the transaction logs are removed. So there's a lot to think about and a lot that happens with regard to the files that you see here, but we don't typically come in and spend a lot of time looking at them. Alright, so let's jump back over to our slides and let's continue our discussion, now focusing on the storage side to your Exchange Mailbox server role and some of the considerations that are necessary there. Now, as far as log management, it is best to put your transaction logs and your database on separate volumes or disks. RAID 1 is recommended for your transaction logs as well. This ensures that those logs are protected. The logs, these are not deleted automatically. They're removed with the backup process. So that's why it's essential when we go with a third-party backup solution, we have to make sure that it's Exchange aware, so that it understands that it has to remove these logs when we do the backup process. Now, if you're concerned with these logs building up and you want to stop that from happening, you can turn on circular logging. This will prevent the logs from building up, but it's not recommended, and there's a reason for that. Because when you actually turn on circular logging, what this does is it makes it so that transaction logs are overwritten. So after transactions from the log file are committed to that mailbox database, they're no longer considered essential when you have circular logging enabled, and so they're written over. Now, the reason it's not recommended to utilize circular logging is because those transaction logs, as we mentioned a moment ago, they can be helpful in the event of a crash, because you restore your database from a backup, and then you can utilize the log files to play back into the database and catch you up to speed with where those logs stopped. Well, if you're using circular logging, then the logs are overwritten. So then you won't be able to restore up to the moment. You'll only be able to restore up to your last full backup. So without circular logging, you're able to utilize incremental backups, and then you can restore the database from the incremental backups. And the good news is, by default, circular logging is disabled. It's good to know what types of storage are supported for Exchange 2013. And so if we look, Exchange supports a variety of different disk type options, including SATA disks, that stands for Serial Advanced Technology Attachment. There's Serial Attached SCSI or SAS. There's SSD, also known as Solid State Drive. SAN, Storage Area Network. Notice there's no network attached storage included in the list, but SCSI is included, iSCSI. These are all supported with Exchange 2013. So a lot of times when you look at this, you say, well, I need to provide a storage solution that is going to be of the highest performance. Okay, and that's great. But it's good to note that Exchange 2013 really reduces disk I/O. And so what does that mean? Well, what it really means for you as an administrator is that you have the ability to use less expensive, slower disks without really seeing a decrease in performance. And so that's why with Exchange, there's this push for JBOD, just a bunch of disks, which doesn't utilize any form of RAID in favor of DAG availability. So you can utilize DAGs in order to make sure that you have multiple passive copies of your active database. So that's great. JBOD is certainly essential, something that we want to consider. At the same time, if you want to spend the money or you have a little bit of extra budget, or if you have, let's say, a legacy SAN that's still there that functions great and is high performance, well, more expensive solutions that you might utilize include iSCSI SAN and Fiber Channel SANs. Let's jump over and take a look at a TechNet site that really maps out the different types of supported storage and gives quite a bit of information on what choices you have at your disposal. And it's important to note that the TechNet article that we're visiting is also listed in the additional resources at the end of this lesson. So here we see a page from TechNet that is actually listed at the end in the additional resources. And if we just scroll down here, we can see there's a lot of information regarding the supported storage architectures, best practice with regard to those architectures, physical disk types that are supported, and then supported or best practices when it comes to those disk types, factors to consider when choosing disk types, and here we see quite a bit with regard to capacity, performance, and so forth, best practices for supported storage configurations, supported RAID types for the Exchange 2013 mailbox server role, database and log file choices for the 2013 mailbox server role. So again, more best practices. There's quite a bit here in terms of what you can do and how to set things up. So the Exchange team really did a good job in terms of providing all of this information for us. And so you certainly want to make that information part of your research on this subject for your design and deployment scenario for Exchange 2013. All right, let's jump back over to our slides and let's continue our discussion, but in a different direction. Let's talk about virtualization. Let's talk for a moment about Exchange 2013 virtualization. This is one of my favorite topics. It's actually a subject that I talk about quite a bit at Tech Mentor conferences and other conferences because virtualization is really something of a mystery to many admins. It's strange because it's been around for such a long time, and yet there's a lot of fear over how to virtualize or if you should virtualize Exchange. And so let's talk about that for a moment. As far as the server roles that can be virtualized, you can virtualize both server roles with supported virtualization platforms. Now, what does that mean? Well, there's actually a server virtualization validation program, an SVVP. And that program pretty much lists out the vendors that are supported when it comes to virtualizing all of the Microsoft solutions. Obviously, Hyper-V is on the solution list, but so is VMware's ESX, as well as hypervisor and virtualization platforms from Citrix and all your main vendors. So it's not really a problem in terms of virtualization. Exchange can pretty much be installed on any virtualization platform within the SVVP program. And as far as the actual process itself, it's the same as installing on physical. Once you get your server set up, whether it's a VM or a physical box, you perform the installation of Exchange the same, regardless of whether or not it's physical or virtual. The wizard dialog is the same no matter what. However, it's important to keep a few points in mind when virtualizing Exchange. For starters, make sure you do not overcommit resources on those systems, and make sure you adhere to published hardware requirements for support. Remember, you have to assign the same hardware resources to the Exchange server virtual machine that you would assign to a physical server running that same workload. Now, if you're sitting there and snickering and thinking, you know what, I can do what I want, and I overcommit my servers all the time. Well, yes, that's your choice, and many are doing it. However, Microsoft will not support you if you are overcommitting resources. So if you do want Microsoft support, you're going to want to make sure that you provide the proper resources for your systems. In fact, in a virtualized environment, I typically recommend that you provide more in terms of hardware resources than you typically would in a physical environment, and that's because the virtualization itself does provide for a bit of a performance hit. Not much, but a little bit of a performance hit. So you might think about providing a little bit of extra to that server, especially if you're planning on using the unified messaging services on that mailbox server. In addition, Microsoft recommends that you use the built-in high availability features, DAG features, not snapshots or other migration options. Exchange doesn't really do well with virtual machine-based high availability solutions. So Microsoft really recommends that you go with the database availability group solution so that that's how you provide for higher availability. The value of going with DAG is that you're able to have multiple copies of your database, passive or lagged copies of that database. You have the ability to have application-aware failovers, so all of that is built into database availability groups, so there's no need to look to snapshots or other solutions. Now, that's not to say that the migration options that are available are not capable of functioning or working. In some cases, they are, especially if you're bringing the system down to a cold boot and you're looking to do a migration over to another system. The tools that are provided by your virtualization vendor should outline whether or not it will work with Exchange 2013. Continuing our discussion of virtualization with Exchange 2013, as far as storage recommendations, it's recommended that you use fixed, not dynamic disks. So with dynamic disks, the disk will expand to fit the needs of the situation. With Exchange, Exchange doesn't do well with that, so fixed disks are essential. Pass-through disks are recommended either to SCSI or iSCSI storage, and so that's good to keep in mind. That's actually, for a production environment, the recommended approach. Now, fixed virtual disks and fiber channel SAN storage, these are also supported, so that's important to note. Moving forward, let's talk about mailbox role planning. Now, with regard to preparing hardware-wise for the mailbox server role, you probably already know you need a 64-bit processor, you're using a 64-bit operating system, and so you know that Itanium is not supported, only Intel and AMD. Perhaps you also know to disable hyperthreading. Maybe you also know that CPUs should be multi-core and that you should have one core per 1,000 mailboxes. So all of that nitty-gritty stuff you're probably already aware of. However, it's important to note that there are certain elements to the mailbox server role that are new to Exchange 2013 and may require some tweaking to your deployment plan. So for starters, you can only have 50 mounted databases per mailbox server. Now, why is that a problem? Well, because with Exchange 2010, you could have 100 databases per mailbox server. So with the change to the new managed store, which was rewritten in C#, also came this change from 100 down to 50. And so that is something that may change as time moves forward, but that is important to consider when it comes to your mailbox role planning. Now, Exchange 2013 has a maximum mailbox size of 100 gigabytes. So that's good to keep track of as well. We know we want to make sure our end users are able to get their mail, but there are limitations to that as well. So what you might want to do when it comes to making the move from, let's say, a legacy Exchange, like with our scenario, over to the current Exchange solution, you're going to need to find out whether or not your current solution uses more than 50 databases. You're going to want to check the maximum mailbox sizes of your end users. So now before you make a move over to Exchange 2013 from, let's say, a legacy version of Exchange like 2010 or 2007, you might want to utilize a tool like the Exchange Server Profile Analyzer, which will tell you a little bit more about your users and how they're doing when it comes to their use of email. So that's one great tool. Now, that tool is not available yet for Exchange 2013, but that's okay. In the scenario that we're presenting, if you're moving over from a legacy version, you can use a tool like that to tell you really the workload of your end users. Are they average users? Are they intense users of email? Where do they stand? So, and that can help you when it comes to designing and deploying your mailbox server role. Another tool that can help is the Exchange Mailbox Server Role Requirements Calculator. This is a tool that was created by Ross Smith, and it's updated by him. He's on the Exchange team. And ultimately, it's the best tool that's out there for determining how to map out your Exchange server deployment. Now, it's currently also not set up for Exchange 2013. Perhaps by the time you're watching this video, that's been changed, and there is the 2013 version. But in the meantime, it's still a great tool that you can utilize for your Exchange mailbox server role planning. Switching gears yet again to public folder planning, with modern public folders, we have folders in public folder mailboxes in a mailbox database. So if you're used to working with a legacy version of Exchange, you know that you would set up your mailbox databases, you would set up your public folder databases, and you would put your public folders in the public folder databases. And that was great and confusing all at the same time, because the capability that we had with mailbox databases was different from public folder databases. So that's changed with modern public folders. Now we have just mailbox databases, and the public folder mailbox goes in those. Now the great thing is that you can have public folder mailboxes that are on different mailbox servers, and you can have public folders that appear to the end user as if it's all part of one set location. Let's say you have nested public folders that some of them may reside in one mailbox database and others may reside in another. Some of the pros and cons here to public folder planning is that the public folder can be part of a DAG, which is a pro. The public folders can be accessed by Outlook 2007 and higher end users, so that's good news, 2007, 2010, and 2013. On the negative side, they cannot be accessed by Outlook web app, and you cannot have replicas closer to end users. So with public folders, that was one of the pluses, is that you could have replicas that were closer to your end users. But that's not the case with modern public folders. So you have to look at how you're going to distribute your public folder content. And part of that might be based upon the location. So you'll look at where public folder content is best put. So you'll look at your organization and determine where the public folders for any given subject or team should be located. And you might also consider size. Remember, the mailbox database has a limitation of 100 gigabytes per mailbox. So with that limitation in mind, you may need to break up your public folder content across multiple public folder mailboxes. So that's all part of public folder planning. It's part of the objectives for the Exchange exam that you know about JetStress. JetStress simulates Exchange disk I/O load on a server to verify the performance and stability of your disk subsystem before putting your server into a production environment. So you can download the JetStress tool for Exchange 2013. It is available, and you can utilize this tool to put that stress on your server to ensure that you have stability. Let's jump over to our server and let's take a look at JetStress in action. Alright, so we've downloaded the Exchange 2013 JetStress tool, and so let's kick it off by clicking Next to do the installation. We accept the terms. We'll let everything just stay as the default and just get the tool installed. We're installing it on our Exchange 2013 mailbox server. Here we go, Exchange JetStress. Alright, and so we'll click Start New Test. Alright, and so you see it checks the system, it looks at a few different things, it sees that they were detected. Now, you may get an error message when running this yourself. It may look for certain files like ese.dll, eseperf.dll, eseperf.ini, eseperf.hxx. So if it looks for these files, it'll give you an error message here, and ultimately you just go to your installation, whether it's a disk or your installation ISO file, and you look for those 3 or 4 files. You copy them over right into the JetStress folder, and then it should kick off just fine. You'll have to restart JetStress in order for it to find everything and work properly. But once you get everything to this point where it checks the system and everything is detected, you click Next. Here we see it says create a new test configuration with an XML file. This is fine. We'll click Next. So we can test disk subsystem throughput or test an Exchange mailbox profile. Just depends on what we're looking to do. In this case, we'll do the mailbox profile. We'll click Next. You can see that the options here, number of mailboxes, 3,000, IOPS per mailbox, mailbox size. So we can actually go with this. We can go higher, we can go lower. Let's go lower just for the sake of making it an easier test. We click Next. And then we can determine if we want to test for performance, database backup, soft recovery, multi-host test. We can determine if we want to run background database maintenance, continue the test run despite encountering disk errors. So there's a lot of things we can do here. In our case, we'll leave it as performance, and we'll deselect run background database maintenance. We'll click Next. We see the output path for test results and the test duration. The default time is 2 hours. We click Next. Now we get a message saying that the number of databases is limited by the physical memory on the computer, and we know that that's going to be the case in our case. We don't have a ton of memory allocated. It's a virtual system that we're using. So here we see number of databases, number of copies per database, and we can adjust these numbers. In our case, we're going to look at the one database, and so we're going to define the database path. And the log path. We click Next, and we see that it says select database source. We can create a new database, attach existing databases, restore backup database, and then we can provide the backup path. We click Next for create new databases. Okay, so here we see the entire summary of what we're looking to do here. We click prepare test, we can run the test, or we can save the test. In this case, we're going to click run test and see what it does. All right, so we're just going to let that run, and we'll actually cancel out of here in a moment. The important thing here is to show you how this tool installs and works. The actual test that we're doing now is somewhat bogus. It's a virtual system that we're using for this lab environment to create the course. But remember, the JetStress tool is a tool that you can use to really test your system's I/O to see if you've configured things well, and then based upon the results that are returned, you'll be able to make adjustments. So let's jump back over to our slides. Let's cap where we're at with our scenario, and then we'll discuss some additional resources that are essential for you with regard to this lesson. Looking back at our scenario, planning for mailbox deployment requires quite a bit of thought, as you can see. With Globalcom, we've given them much to consider, but they'll need additional hand-holding, so we'll offer our services to help inventory their existing deployment and gather the data needed to help them plan further. In addition, during the process, we're hoping that some of the new tools will be deployed, like the Mailbox Calculator for Exchange 2013. So we have some additional resource links for you for this lesson. For starters, there's the Exchange Server Profile Analyzer, and you can see the link up there at the top. This will help you get a good understanding of what your end users are doing when it comes to their email. There's an article on Exchange 2013 storage configuration options that we took a look at earlier, and you're able to find that link here. Public folders in the new Office is a blog article on blogs.technet.com, so that's worth looking into. And then the Exchange 2013 virtualization support documentation from TechNet is also listed down at the bottom. So we hope you found this informative. We'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next lesson.